Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om Gajananam Bhudaganadi Sevidham Kapidda Jambho Balasara Bakshitham Umasudam Sogha Vinashakaranam Namami Vickneswara Pada Pankajam. Om Gajananam Mahakayam Viknarajam Vinayakam Vishvesham Vishvashaksham Ganeshayam Namo Namaha. Jnananandamayam Devam Nirmalar Spatikhatrudhim Adharam Sarva Vidyanam Hayagrivam Upasmahe Yasyat Varada Vakratyaya Parishatya Parashatham Vignam Nignam Tisatatam Vishwashremam Tamashraye. Gurud Brahma, Gurud Vishnu, Gurud Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurud Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, Gurave Sarvalokana, Bisaje Bhavaroginaha, Nidaye Sarva Vidyanam Sri Dakshinamurthaye Namaha. Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Sarveshwararpanamastu. Sarvopanishad Gavo Doktha Gopalanandanaha Itihasancha Puranancha Doktha Gita Mritat Mahat. Harihi Om. Om Tat Sat. Sai Ram, and welcome to what has swiftly progressed on to week 5 of the secrets of the Puranas. So today we're looking at 2 other Puranas. Having looked at the Vishnu Purana, Narada Purana, Padma Purana, Garuda Purana. Last week we looked at Varaha Purana and Srimad Bhagavatam, or Bhagavata Purana. Today we are moving on to Matsya Purana and Kurma Purana, right? Matsya and Kurma Purana. Now, before I talk to you about these 2 Puranas, it's essential that I give you some understanding or explanation about the 4 yugas. It's called Chatur Yuga, 4 Chatur Yuga cycle. Now, a yuga is basically a cosmic age, according to the Vedic system of measuring universal time, right? How universal time is measured. You see, the Vedic time is cyclical, unlike the Western concept of linear time, right? So the yuga is a cosmic age. And as far as the Hindu Vedic system is concerned, it dictates that there are 4 yugas, right? Hence they are called Chatur Yugas, right? There's Satya Yuga in the order of the cycle, right? Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga, right? So each yuga is a cycle of time in its own universality. And of course, collectively, they are called Chatur Yugas, right? Together, they form one concept called Chatur Yuga. Individually, they are Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga. And as of course, you know, we are in the final stage of the, right, Anta, or towards the end of the Chatur Yuga. Now, one Chatur Yuga, that means all the 4 yugas, lasts more than 8.6 million years, right? In terms of your Earth years. So 1 year, you got 365 days, 53 weeks, or whatever the case may be, right? This 4 yugas collectively, one Chatur Yuga measures to about 8.64 million years, right? And it's like the 4 seasons. You have, UK and most of Europe and the US and all that, you have 4 seasons. Likewise, just like the 4 seasons rotate, you've got spring, summer, autumn, and winter. So they rotate every year like that. The 4 ages, the 4 yugas, also rotate without an end. So who creates this? Well, the power of Lord Brahma's creation. Yeah, this is basically. And what happens when Brahma creates this? After the end of each yuga, Satya Yuga at the end, when the dissolution happens to Satya Yuga, that's the day Brahma sleeps. When he sleeps, for that one day, there is no creation and the universe comes to an end. And then the next yuga commences. And then at the end of that cycle of yuga, he sleeps, dissolution. And then the next yuga starts like that, right? And of course, Brahma, as I said, from a Trimurti point of view, Brahma is the creator, Vishnu is the sustainer, right? And Shiva is the destroyer or annihilator. So if you look at Lord Vishnu, he is the sustainer. So whatever Brahma creates, he sustains. And of course, you heard in the Gita where Lord Krishna gives the assurance that I have always come from time to time. Whenever there's a decline in righteousness, I take a form to restore the balance of dharma and the balance of righteousness. So that's what the famous yada yada hi dharmasya, that saying. Lahinir bhavati bharata pyutthanam dharmasya tathatmanam sajamyaham paritranaya sadhuna vinashaya chatuskrutam vinashaya chaturkrisam dharmastham sthavanarthaya sambhavami yugege. Right? To reinstate dharma and well-being and righteousness, I will incarnate from age to age. So he's talking about Satya Yuga, he's talking about Treta Yuga, he's talking about Dwapara Yuga, he's talking about Kali Yuga. And of course, if you look at the Dashavataram, the 10 avatars of Lord Vishnu, in each yuga, some incarnation has taken place. And what was Vishnu's first incarnation? Right? What is Vishnu's first incarnation in the lineage of Dashavataram? It is the Matsya avatar. Hence we got Matsya Purana. Right? The second was Kurma avatar. Hence we got Kurma Purana. Right? Now, if you look at the way in which Vishnu's Dashavataram has taken place, now I'm talking about science now, right? The science behind the Dashavataram, it first started as a life, incarnated as a life, but purely in water. And then Kurma avatar, tortoise, both water and land, or turtle if you like, right? Water and land. Then Varaha avatar, only land. Then Narasimha, half animal, half man. I want you to look at the evolution here, right? And this is synonymous with Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, right? He says, or he prefers that, life first began in water in the form of something called an amoeba, something that only can exist in water. So synonymous to Lord Vishnu's incarnation. Of course, if you look at the timeline, we go back far, 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 far deeper into the historic times than the existence of Charles Darwin, right? So what you make of that is entirely up to you, but I'm saying these things were already there, present. Then it's there for people to take and then conceptualize it and then repackage it and then offer it to the world as a new discovery. So Narasimha, then of course, Dwarf, Vamana, then the imperfect man, Parasurama, then the perfect man, Rama. Man, I didn't say God, perfect man, Rama. Then man as God, God as man, Krishna, and Buddha, then finally Kalki. So the last 2 avatars have taken place in Kalki. Oh, one has taken place, Buddha, the other one is Kalki, is going to come anytime, right? Someone asked me last week, what does he look like? Well, we don't know, but you will when the time comes, right? So Matsya Purana, again, is one of the Mukhya Puranas in the line of 18 major Puranas. And perhaps it is the oldest or can be seen as one of the oldest because of the initiality of the Dashavataram, right? First amongst the rest, Matsya Purana, because Vishnu's avatar as, primus inter pares, as they say in Latin, yeah, first among all others, is survived over long periods of time, right? Survived history, survived theft, survived what you call transliteration, misconceptualized transliteration, many versions varying in details and publications. But initially, if you look at it, it had about 290 odd chapters, right? And, Matsya Purana says, if it is going to be classified as a Purana, then it has to have the Panchalakshanas that I've said, the 5 characteristics. If it does not have any one of those 5 Panchalakshanas, right, it is called not a Purana, but an Akhyana. That means incomplete Purana, right? So we're looking at timeline. It's between 200 and 500 CE, the timeline. So you can imagine the history that it goes back to, that sort of time, right? It's also a form of encyclopedia. Now, when you hear the word encyclopedia, the next thing that comes to mind is this is something that can give you a lot of knowledge, the basis of encyclopedia, right? But if you look at the topics that the Puranas cover, the various Puranas, right? And this is the 7th Purana I'm talking to you about, Matsya Purana. It talks about many things, right? It talks about mythology, right? It talks about building, construction, and sculpture. And I'll talk to you about this in a while, right? It talks about temple features. So if you think the tall, Gopuram, if you look at the temples, right? The tall structure with a lot of intricate designs is man created. No, it was already existed, and it is spoken about in many Puranas, Matsya Purana notably, right? It talks about Vastu Sastra, right? So Vastu, if you think it's a modern creation, no, again, it goes back 200 to 500 BCE, right? It talks about the various types of yoga. It talks about dharma, or leading, how to lead a dharmic life, right? And it also touches on dana. And of course, it talks about tirthas or pilgrimages, right? And it also talks about government, how to govern the people, how to get the love and respect of your subjects. Can you imagine that time itself? We're talking about how a good king should rule his kingdom, right? So, over 290 chapters, over 20,000 verses, right? But as I said, it's been dumbed down, right, to about perhaps not more than 15,000 verses at the moment, right? And I've been giving you the classification of the Puranas as falling into one of those 3 gunas, or characterized gunas, right? Like Rajasic, Tamasic, and Sattvic. The Matsya Purana is also classified as a Tamasic Purana, right? But it is important regardless of its characteristic, because what you want to take out there is the knowledge, partly because it glorifies Shiva as Agni, right? When I do the Brahma Purana, I'll talk about Shiva as Agni, right? But today, I'm talking about Matsya Purana. Matsya Purana also surfaces in other Puranas, right? For example, in the Bhagavata Purana, there is a mention of Mahabharata and how that comes about, right? And of course, the legend of how Matsya began goes back with King Manu. Now, Manu is extremely significant for 2 reasons, right? For Matsya avatar taking place, and secondly, for starting life at the end of one cycle, and the second cycle being transformed into from one, or transferred, right? Or transiting from one yuga to another yuga. And that's the reason why Vishnu took the avatar as Manu. Of course, because of the time and everything, he is called Vaivasvata Manu, right? And his Vaivasvata Manu also falls into the Manvantara, which is one of the Panchalakshanas, right? Now, Manu is is important because, like I said, Vaivasvata Manu is also part of the Vaivasvata Manvantare. This is very significant because it is used in Sankalpas today when you go and do pujas in temples or at your homes or whatever. When the priest comes and does the puja, he always takes the Sankalpam, isn't it? You know the Sankalpam? It starts with Mamopata Samastha Duridakshayadhara Shri Parameshwara Prityartham Subhe Shobana Bhuthe Atya Brahmanaha Vitiya Paraha Shvetavaraha Kalpe Vaivasvata Manvantare Ashtavimshati Tithame Kali Yuge Prathame Pade Jambudvipe Bharata Varishe. It goes on. But you see, the Vaivasvata Manvantare comes in there because with King Manu, life began, and Manu also wrote something called the Manusmriti, which speaks of the dharmic life, how to lead a dharmic life. And one of the most important things he says in that is, never judge someone until you have inquired. So exercise discrimination. I've always said this before, the 3 V's, V, right? The first V is Vicharana. Vicharana means investigation, right? Finding out. Then comes the second V is Viveka, discrimination. Then only the third V, which is Vak, speech. So Manusmriti says, before you judge, make a decision, or say anything to someone, exercise Vicharana, then exercise Viveka, then only Vak, speak. Because a lot of the times in the world today, right, someone says something to someone and that someone believes it, and then, relationships break down and all of that. So Manusmriti is already giving you an anecdote to today's problems of relationships. People just do not know how to maintain relationships. They don't exercise because the mind is saying, listen to this fellow and cut off that fellow. Don't listen to that fellow, friends with this fellow. That's the mind. Mind will do that, right? You have to use your buddhi, intelligence to control your manas, your mind. Otherwise, right, everything will go on the basis of Ichcha Shakti, desire. Ichcha Shakti is nasanaha. It leads to your destruction. So anyway, King Manu, coming to how Matsya came, was doing some pujas in the Ganges River, right? In one part of the Ganges River. And then he, when he cupped some water to offer, as they do, the prokshana to Surya Bhagavan, in his hand there was a little fish. And this fish says, don't throw me back into the river because the bigger fishes are waiting to eat me. Please take me with you and keep me safe. Now, of course, he's a king. Anyone who requests the king's protection, the king is duty bound, dharma, to give protection. So he puts the little fish in his kamandalu. So when he finishes his morning absolution and, Surya Namaskar, he comes out, but the fish has already grown to the full size of the kamandalu. You know what's a kamandalu, right? The rishis, they carry the little pot, right? So he had to call his soldiers to come and get a bigger pot. Now, wherever he puts, the fish grew and grew and grew and grew until it said to him, take me to a specific part of the Ganges River, right? Then he says, and this is also repeated in the Shatapatha Brahmanaha, right? It says to King Manu, look, this yuga is going to come to an end, right? But I have been instructed to tell you to build a huge ship. Now, this is the story of Noah's Ark. In Christianity, you have Noah and the Ark, where he built a huge ship and he took, male and female of each animal, life, plant, everything. So similar to that, Manu was asked by this fish, right? small sharpari, fish. He said, build a huge ship, and then I want you to also go and collect the Sapta Rishis, the 7 sages, all the seeds, plants, animals, because in this day and this time, the world is going to come and to an end. There will be a great deluge, So Manu, of course, accepts the fish's advice as the word of the Lord, and he does all of that. And when the deluge begins, right, the fish comes to Manu's aid, right? And it says, get all of you get on the board. And then he says, tie the rope to the horn of the fish. The fish had a horn, so tie it there. And then the fish, the Matsya avatar, this is Matsya avatar, took him to the highest peak point where he was left there until, everything ended. And then the fish revealed himself as Lord Vishnu and says, now you start. You are the first life form in the second yuga that is going to begin now, right? So that is why Manusmriti is very important, because he gave this dharmic life record. And then, of course, he's also significant in terms of how Matsya avatar came. You see, Matsya is a fish. So the Matsya Purana is also symbolic, because you've heard of the expression, the law of the fishes. Law of the fishes basically means, where the little fishes need protection from the bigger fishes, So the fish asking Manu to protect it is basically a lesson to all of us, saying, even though, we are bigger and better and in a stronger position than most people who are in a lesser position than us, it is our job or our dharma to actually protect the less able, right? The less, the less fortunate, the less physically. That is what the Matsya Purana is trying to get across, the law of the fishes. You see, the fish actually is a divine creation. It needs no protection, right? So it is relevant in a sense that there are sometimes you need to give a hand to some things without which your help, without your help, cannot continue to sustain itself. So hence, the fish is life. And of course, Manu coming to help and taking them across to start a new life, that ship is called the Vedas. Okay, thus signifying the rites and rituals of the Vedas, right? In fact, the Rig Veda talks about the golden ship of Manu. So it's all connected, you see. They all cross-refer to each other. So it cannot be something that has just been written, out of a fanciful imagination of someone, because that extent of cross-referencing is practically and virtually impossible, because they didn't happen at the same time, right? If you got 10 books in front of you, you can cross-refer and write one article citing all 10 books. But if, some books are not even written, some books have been written, some are being written, how can you cross-refer with such efficacy and such accuracy? Right? And it's not just that. When I talk about cross-reference, in Garuda Purana, Matsya is mentioned, and Vaivasvatha Manvantara is mentioned, King Manu is mentioned, and the great deluge in the boat is mentioned. Linga Purana, which I will do with you next week, also talks about Lord Vishnu taking the form of a fish, tying the boat and pulling it away to safety, right? This is one version of Matsya Avatar. The other version is when Brahma went to sleep, right, at the end of Satya Yuga, when he yawned, right, the Vedas knowledge, the 4 books, Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharvana, just slipped out of Brahma's mouth when he went into snooze mode. Now, there was a horse called Hayagriva. He took it, and he went deep, because he was always interested in the Vedas. It asked Brahma to teach him, but Brahma said, you do not have, right, the right mental attitude for me to teach you yet. So go and cultivate the right mental attitude. You want to learn physically, you're able. Yes, that's a different matter. But mentally also you should be prepared, right? That's why I always talk to you about Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda. You have to engage in Karma Kanda sufficiently, adequately, so that you can, rise to the Jnana Kanda. Once you are Jnana Kanda, you don't need the Karma Kanda anymore. But if you're continuously only, stuck on Karma Kanda, then it's difficult, right? So anyway, he saw this coming out of Brahma's mouth and he took it. And he wanted to go and learn it all, right? So he went into the depths of the ocean where he could, use the Vedas and learn it. But when he went down there and he tried to read, he didn't understand. That is why not everything you can learn on your own. Some things you need a guru. Some things you need an instructor. Some things you need a teacher. Some things you need a master, right? This is another lesson. So Brahma, when he woke up, he knew somebody had taken it, right? So he summoned Vishnu. Vishnu, of course, as a sustainer, he immediately took the form of Matsya. He went down to the depths, right? Of course, when Hayagriva saw Vishnu coming, he knew he was cornered, right? So he handed the Vedas back to Matsya Avatar. That's why you see some illustrations, right? Some pictures or some images where you see a big fish, and then on the mouth of the fish, you see the 4 Vedas, right? And some you will see a horse-headed human person holding the Vedas. This is Hayagriva, very powerful. I'll tell you about Hayagriva shortly, right? Now, Vishnu as Matsya Avatar rescues the Vedas and then returns them to Brahma. And then he says, since you are so particular about learning the Vedas, and since you stole, you will never learn the Vedas, but you will always be the protector of the Vedas. So anybody who wants to go into the Vedas, wants to learn everything, has to get your blessings first. You look at the sthanam, the position that Vishnu gave him, right? That is why most of the times you would hear me chanting the Hayagriva. Hayagriva mupasmahe yasyat varada vakradhyaya parishatya parashatam Vignam Nignam ti satatam Vishvashremam Tamashraye. That is Hayagriva Stotram. Once you have his permission, any knowledge is accessible. Anyway, so I told you Matsya Avatar talks about 3 things in particular, right? One is the temple design or architecture. So you go into a temple, you wonder, why is this in this way or this manner or this shape or this form or this fashion, right? It is because it has been dictated, right? The temple sculpture, the temple positioning, the garbhagrahas, the sanctum sanctoriums. What is the measurement? What is the height, right? You will never see the sanctum sanctorium, the mula sthanam or the garbhagraha at the same level as the human who's standing in the temple. It is always raised. And you will see that the raised platform actually, right, is in line, right? If you draw a line across, if you are standing there and the base of the raised platform actually, is in sync with your nabi, and your nabi is where your Mooladhara chakra is. So going around is basically activating the chakra, right? So this is science. Anyway, Matsya Purana talks about 20 different styles of architecture as far as Hindu temples is concerned. So it talks about the Meru style. It talks about the Mandara style. It talks about the Kailasha design, right? It talks about the Vamashik design. So 20 different types of design. Matsya Purana has stated about temples back 200 to 500 CE. You think some architect is drawing it? No, it's based on ancient scripture, right? It also talks about the guidelines in terms of the foundation, the space between one and the other, the core focus in temples, and then the spire. It's called the Vimana or the Gopuram or the Shikara, right? The spire, the tall spire. Right? And from that, the Matsya Purana also talks about town planning. Town planning, how towns should be planned. Can you imagine? It has gone to that level. Now, the second big thing it talks about is pilgrimages, right? Pilgrimage sites. Like most Puranas, it talks about the Mahatmyas or the Tirtha Sthalas. Tirtha Sthalams. Tirtha Sthalas. Now, one of the, I think is the late chapters 185 to about 195, somewhere around there, right? It talks about the different points at which people should go and visit and sap the energy, right? It talks about the 7 Shapta Tirthas, how each river has got its own powers of attraction. But principally, it talks about all the 7 rivers, right? Ganga, Yamuna, Kaveri, Saraswati, Narmada, Sindhu, all this 7 rivers. But principally, it talks about the Triveni Sangam. Triveni Sangam is, you have to go to a place called Allahabad, right? Previously called Prayag. And after the, Islamic invasion, it's called Allahabad. I think now Modi is changing it back to Prayag. So Triveni Sangam is in Prayag. This is where 3 rivers converge. Ganga, Yamuna, and Saraswati. It's very clear, right? Now, I have been there a few times, right? You have to take a boat, and it's about a 40-minute ride on the boat. And then what they have done is they have put 4 boats and built a platform in the middle of the 4 boats, and the 4 boats are keeping that platform afloat. And it is directly under this platform that the 3 rivers are converging. You can see 2 rivers. You can see Ganga and Yamuna very clearly because the color is different, the flow is different, right? It meets there. But Saraswati you can't see because it is flowing under. Then what happens? If you want to go and have a dip, of course, it's in the middle of the river, so you really can't. It's very deep and all of that. It's not safe. So what they do is, I said, no chance. I am going in, right? So what they did, they tied a rope to my leg, right? And then they tied that rope back to the boat in 2-3 places. So even if I go down and I'm thinking I can't because of the rope, and they'll pull me back. So then you get onto the platform from the boat, you get off on the platform, and then you try and go in holding the platform, you try and go, right? Now, I'll tell you, the moment I went into the water, I was holding the platform, right? But I was trying to dip, right? The current, oh my God, is so strong. That is Saraswati, right? That's why they say it's very dangerous. And of course, I dipped 3 times, and then I came back up because they were pulling me, right? I said, no, you can't stay very long, and so on and so forth. So that is Triveni Sangam. And this has been described in Matsya Purana, 2 to 500 BC. That is called the Prayag Mahatmya. Yeah, Prayag Mahatmya. Mahatmya means the pilgrimage, Tirtha site. So it also talks about the Kumbh Mela. The Kumbh Mela in Haridwar. The Kumbh Mela in different parts, but mainly in Haridwar. Talks about Rishikesh, right? All these are mentioned in the pilgrimage sites part in the Matsya Purana, right? Then it talks about yoga and worship. This is the 3rd biggest focus of Matsya Purana, right? I'm doing away with all the little bits and giving you the main crux, the main focus on the Purana, Matsya Purana, basically. Yoga and worship, right? It talks about, obviously it talks about yoga and how to move from karma yoga to bhakti yoga, from bhakti yoga to jnana yoga, like that, right? And of course, it also talks about yoga is jnana yoga, isn't it? Dhyana yoga or Raja yoga. But if you want to become a karma yogi, path of action, right? Selfless service, right? Nishkama karma, selfless service. Then Matsya Purana says, I think in chapter 52 or something like that, it says you need to have 8 essential qualities if you want to become a karma yogi. Number 1, you must have a sense of clemency and non-injury to all beings. Man, plant, animal, anything, clemency and a sense of non-urgency, right? You got to have forbearance. You got to give protection from those who come to you when they are in distress. Can be anybody. Anyone who comes to you, you must become Manu and help them, like the Manu helped the fish. Freedom from envy. God gives everybody what they need to survive. Don't be envious of others, because it just pushes you into a different line altogether, right? That is freedom of envy. Then, of course, you need external and internal purification. These are the first two stages in Ashtanga Yoga. I've spoken to you before. It is Yama and Niyama, right? Then it talks about calmness, right? Then it talks about non-miserliness. Non-miserliness, that means dana, charity, right? And not hankering after any other person's property. 8 qualities you must have before you become a karma yogi. And once you become a karma yogi, it says you have to do 5 types of worship or vandana. Worship of the devas, deva vandana. Worship of one's parents and ancestors, pitru vandana. Worship of, helping your guests and everybody around you, aditi vandana. Helping animals, birds, plants, everything, that is mriga vandana. And finally, worshipping the rishis and the teachers and the gurus, and by reciting, holy things. So rishi / acharya vandana. So you got to do this. Then only you become a karma yogi, right? But interestingly, there is one part of the Matsya Purana, right? I mean, the science in these Puranas, right? It's just amazing. It talks about ecology. Can you imagine? 200 to 500 CE, BCE. It is talking about the significance of ecology and how people should go into environmental sustainability. Environmental sustainability is something the United Nations just came up in 2017. 30 sustainable goals. One of them was, preserving ecology. But our Matsya Purana has already said that. That, my dear friends, is Matsya Purana. Right? Now, moving on to Kurma Purana. Again, Kurma Purana is also a Mukhya Purana. And of course, in the lineage of Dashavatharam, I said to you, Matsya is the first, second is Kurma. One was fish, the other is tortoise or turtle. One can survive both in water and land. So you see the evolution there. Now, basically, the evolution is telling us we must move away from one stage and go to the next stage, and then not stay there, comfort zone, right? Not stay there. Go to the next stage, next stage, next stage, next stage, next stage, like that. Just like the theory of evolution evolved, just like the Dashavatara evolved. Man's life should also evolve from one stage of consciousness to another stage of consciousness to another stage. And then at the time when you're able to manipulate your subconscious, then you can use that subconscious to, trample yourself to the superconscious. Very simple. It's very simple when you look at it simply. It becomes very difficult when you look at it in a complex manner. So again, the survival of the Kurma Purana over ages and ages now leaves it with about 95 chapters and probably about 17,500 verses. Previously, it had more than 100 and more than 24,000 verses. Now, what's left is about, slightly less than 100 chapters. I think about 96 chapters it has, and about 17,000 words. Verses, not words, right? Again, it talks about Vishnu, Shiva, Shakti with equal enthusiasm. But the very important thing that I want to tell you about Kurma Purana is, in one part of Kurma Purana, there is something called Ishvara Gita. Now, I've spoken about Bhagavad Gita to you, right? There is only one Gita that is called the Bhagavad Gita. And Bhagavad Gita was Krishna's conversation with Arjuna. And we did that, over 11, 12 weeks. We covered all the 18 chapters. But in Kurma Purana, it talks about the conversation of Lord Vishnu with Lord Shiva, where Lord Vishnu is asking Shiva, can you tell me about this world? So exactly how Krishna told Arjuna in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and what we have as a result of that Bhagavad Gita, the same thing, yes, Vishnu is being told by Shiva about his. You see, the thing here is not who is greater, Shiva or Vishnu. The thing here is they are equals. And they treat and give respect to each other in that respect, in that context. So yes, in Mahabharata, in Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna is giving a discourse to Arjuna, and that has come to us in the form of Bhagavad Gita. The first day of the war, you had Bhagavad Gita, and the 18th day of the war, you had Vishnu Sahasranama. Ananyas chintayantoma yejana paryupashate desa nitya viyukthanam yoga kshemam vahamyaham. What is he saying there? He's saying the moment you engage in my service and look after everything that I have created, I will look after your yoga kshema. Your worldly needs is my responsibility over that. Yoga kshemam vahamyaham. Very powerful. The same thing, right? At the end of one of the Vishnu Shiva, they do a lot of things together. And at the end of one of those characterizations, saving the Devas from one of their usual problems that they get involved in, Vishnu and Shiva hug each other. And then Vishnu sits down and says, can you explain the connotation between world, life, and self? World, life, and self. Shiva says, okay, sit and listen to me, right? So Shiva explains the concept of Atman, self, soul, Brahma Purusha, Prakriti, Maya, Yoga, and Moksha. This is called Ishvara Gita, and Ishvara Gita is 25% of Kurma Purana. Fantastic, Ishvara Gita. Of course, when I did Ramayana with you, I spoke about King Janaka's guru, right? He's called Ashtavakra, Rishi Ashtavakra. Ashtavakra's conversation with Janaka has come to us in the form of Ashtavakra Gita, right? That's also very powerful. You've heard of kings who became Rishi, but Janaka is completely distinctive because he was already a Rishi when he was told to become a king. Because the kings needed a role model. And he always went back to his guru, Ashtavakra. And one of the great conversations between Ashtavakra and Janaka is what has come to us as Ashtavakra Gita. I mean, it's a plan that, I want to do this sometime in future, but let's see, right? So this is Ashtavakra Gita. It's also the philosophy is Advaita, Advaita Vedanta. Advaitam means moving away from Dvaitam, duality, to Advaitam, singularity, right? Now, one of the most important things that Shiva tells Vishnu in Ashtavakra Gita, and certainly, in Ishvara Gita, and certainly it is mentioned in different ways by Ashtavakra Rishi to Janaka, and of course by Krishna to Arjuna. They say, Shiva said, anybody from any varna can achieve liberation through bhakti yoga. All are equal in my eyes. So who is there talking about this? Oh, there's a caste system and all of that. That is because people are ignorant. You don't have that knowledge. So what people feed you, you take and you use it as your knowledge. When you do research and go back and do research into all these books, you will realize the gods themselves have said all are equal. And many times I've spoken to you about the Purusha Suktam, how it says, who is what part. And finally it says, the lowest class is my feet. And what do? We do Pada Puja. Do we do Mukha Puja? No, we do Pada Puja. We worship the feet. So how do you draw the balance there? Between Brahmano, Mukamasid, Bahu, Rajan, Yakritaha, like that. Then, the third class, the business class, and then finally the lowest class become the feet. Gita has said that. Yet Manushya Sammataha. That means everyone is same. Every single human being is the same. And Shiva said to Vishnu in Ishvara Gita the same thing. Anyone from any varna can attain me through Bhakti Yoga. When was Kurma Yoga? 8th century CE. That was 2 to 5, this is 8. Right? So it does talks about many things. And also, Kurma Purana is also classified as the Tamasic Purana. Right? Tamasic Purana. So, how did this Kurma avatar come about? How this Kurma avatar came about? Now, you all know the story of the churning of the ocean of milk, right? There was a lot of problems, and then the rishis were called in to do a havan, and then the rishis were doing the havan, and part of that, one Devi came from the havan and said, you have to go and churn Vishnu's ocean of milk, Samudra, Shira Samudra, right? That's why in the worship of Lakshmi and in Sri Suktam, there comes a little part that say Lakshmi Shira Samudra Rajathanayam Sri Ranga Dhameshwari, right? When you churn the ocean of milk, even Lakshmi will come out of there. So this Devi who came from the Yajna told the rishis to go and approach Brahma. Of course, when they approach Brahma, Brahma goes to Vishnu, and Vishnu says, go and churn, no problem, right? Use Vasuki, the snake, that the serpent that holds Vishnu. So Vishnu says, Vasuki, you go and help them, right? Use Mandara mountain. Mandhara Giridhara Madhura Manohara, Mandara. Mandara means mountain, right? Mandara mountain. Anyway, so Vasuki, roped itself around the mountain. On one side, the Devas were pulling, and the other side, the Asuras were pulling. So they were trying to churn. But because there was no base holding Mandara, it kept sinking. So Brahma went back to Vishnu. Vishnu then took the form of Kurma avatar, the turtle. Turtle is strong, solid back, isn't it? They're very soft, the four, limbs and the head. And I've spoken to you about the turtle, how fast the reflexes is. And I've said to you, you should be like the tortoise or the turtle. Take your head in the moment you see some bad thing coming your way. Avoid toxicity, boom, as fast as the tortoise head goes in. That's how you should be. Avoid, right? So Vishnu placed himself as Kurma avatar, on top of which the Mandara mountain rested. Vasuki was used as a serpent, the snake, the rope. And of course, on one side, the Devas were pulling, on the other side, the Asuras were pulling, and the ocean was being churned, right? Now, you heard of only one thing or two things that, when the ocean was churned. First, the Halhala poison came out, right? And anyway, it's not Halhala. I tell you what's the real name, right? How it became Halahala, I don't know, right? Even in bhajans, you have Hala Haladara Shambho, Anathanata Shambho, there are several things that came out of the churning. Okay, of course, the first, everything, first the negativity has to come out. Then only finally the goodness will come out, and in the end you'll get the real goodness. So the Amritam did not come out immediately after the poison. Of course, when the poison came, Shiva came and drank it. And then, of course, his throat became blue. He sustained the poison there. Blue. That's why he's called Neelakantha. Neelakantha means one with a blue throat. Right? So anyway, this whole story is also mentioned in 2 or 3 chapters in Srimad Bhagavatam. Last week, I told you about Srimad Bhagavatam. I said what each chapter talks about. Chapter 7 talks about how he became Kurma avatar, and chapter 8 also talks about the churning of the milk. But I want to tell you what are the things that came out as a result of the churning, right? The churning. Now, first, of course, the Srimad Bhagavatam also refers to this. The first thing it came out was the Kala Kutha. That is the name of the poison. Kala Kutha means dark substance. Poison. Dark bluish substance. So when Shiva came and drank it all, he had a blue throat, and that's it. Now, basically, what is the significance of that? The spiritual significance is even poison can be contained when you are vibrating at that level of spiritual consciousness. Yes. That's what Shiva is saying. Shiva is showing. At that level of consciousness, poison will not affect you. But for that to happen, you must not be affected, but all these worldly ties, you must not be affected. You must have risen above that. You're vibrating at that level of one with the universe. Then nothing will harm you. Nothing can harm you. So after that, Kalakuta, now over a period of time, it's like Chinese whispers, something you say and then in the end totally sounds different. Kalakuta has become Halahala. Anyway, but that is the poison, right? So the name is not important. The lesson is. First, a cow came after that. After the Kalakuta, cow. The cow is called Surabhi. Surabhi was a pure cow that came from the churning of the ocean, right? The universe, Prakriti, Bhumi Devi gave that. And it comes from Shira Samudram. That is why you'll always see cows being worshipped. Go Dhana is also there. And Go Vandana is also there. Worship of the cow. Go Puja. They do a lot of Go Pujas in India, right? And the ghee given by Surabhi is what is used by the rishis in the yajna, right? Those days, they only used the ghee that is processed from the cow's milk. Today, of course, you've got so many in the market, some pure, some unpure, some, all kinds of things. Then, after the Surabhi, the cow came out, the second thing to come out was a horse called Uchchaishrava, right? This horse was taken by Bali Maharaj, who was there, the great King Bali. And of course, to teach him a lesson, the fourth avatar, which is Vamana avatar, also came. I'll talk about that later, right? Not in this week. Then Airavatha. Airavatha is Lord Indra's elephant. Airavatha. And Airavata's companion, Airavati. So all the elephants came and they went in 8 different directions. Hence you have Ashtatik Palaka, the guardian deities of 8 different directions. So north, south, east, west, northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest, like that. This already spoken about in Kurma Purana. And if you research into the modern directional, creation, it's not that, maybe 200-300 years ago. North, south, east, all this. Ashtatik Palakas already came. In fact, in the Rig Veda, it also talks about Dashatik Palaka. That means one is the north, one is the south, right? The poles, North Pole and South Pole. That is Rahu and Ketu. Anyway, I'll come back to that, right? So first, Kalakuta poison, then Surabhi the cow, then the horse, Uchchaishrava, given to Bali, then Airavata, the elephants all came, went to 8 different directions. Indra took them. Then a beautiful green emerald gem came called Kaustuba. Kaustuba, this was taken and given as a gift to Lord Vishnu. That is why if you go to Vishnu temples, you will see a big green gem that he's wearing on his chest. That is Kaustuba. And some bhajans and kirtans, you'll have Kaustuba there. And even in Vishnu Sahasranama, Kaustuba comes. Right? Okay. That is number 4, the Kaustuba gem. Right? Solid, pure green emerald, right? Then after a flower came the Parijata, right? Parijata also appears in many of the shlokas and indeed in Vishnu Sahasranama. And then the Apsaras, the beautiful maidens and the Vanitamanis of the universe were generated. Only then, the 6th to emerge out of that is Mahalakshmi, right? I mean, one of the Puranic tales is that is when Mahalakshmi was wedded to Lord Vishnu. Simple as that, right? She came out and she was wedded to Lord Vishnu, and Vishnu gave her a place in the chest. That is why you see, Vishnu has got Lakshmi, Sri Devi, and Bhudevi on his chest. Bhudevi because she is the one who's giving all of this, and Sri Devi because she came out as one of the things. The 7th was someone called Varuni. Varuni is the goddess of drinking, right? And she is the one who will then create, the method by which the Amrit is going to be disseminated, right? So Varuni came and gave some energy drink, to to the Devas and the Asuras. So they were energized and they began to churn again after a short break. Churning, what comes out? Dhanvantari. Dhanvantari is Lord Vishnu as the medicine man, the goddess of, or the god of medicine for the gods. Right? The god of medicine is there for the gods. Definitely, we have access to him as man. Right? And there are some temples in India, it's called Dhanvantari Sthala. You can go and see Dhanvantari. A lot of medicinal or Ayurvedic stuff happens there. Dhanvantari is the one who comes out with the pot. It's called the Ayurveda Kalash. From there is where Ayurveda comes. The science of Ayurveda comes from Dhanvantari. And what Dhanvantari gave at the end, right, was the Kalasha with Amrit. First he gave the Ayurveda, right? Then he gives the Amrita. Now, when the demons, the Asuras, saw the Amrita Kalash, they straight away went and grabbed it from Dhanvantari's hand and ran away, right? And of course, the Devas looked at this and say, all our efforts, oh Bhagavan, Vishnu, what is going to happen, right? They took shelter of Vishnu. Now, they went and they began to fight among themselves. Who's going to drink first? Who's going to give? How you're going to give? How you're going to measure? So among themselves, they had the Kalash there with the Amrit, Jiva Amritam, right? That means no death, immortality. Right? The whole thing came about because constant fight between Devas and Asuras. So the Devas prayed for immortality at the expense of the Asuras. And so this all came about as a result. So all this was said, okay, you do all this, at the end of it, this Amritam will come, you take this Amritam, you'll have immortality. But the idea was that the Asuras don't get any of it, right? But they've grabbed it now, it is in their possession. But even though it is in their possession, they have no access to it because they're fighting who's going to drink it first and how much should each person drink. See, sometimes you have access to the most powerful things, but you cannot use it because your mental state is wrong. Mental state is wrong. So you don't have, it's there with you, but you cannot derive any benefit from it, right? Then Vishnu, what he does, he takes the form of Mohini Rupa, the most beautiful Apsara. And then it offers itself to the Asuras and says, I will help you do all this. The moment the Asuras look at Mohini, they are so entranced, enchanted, completely swept off their feet by the beauty of Mohini, and they just hand her the Kalasham and say, yes, you are the only one who can do this. But before I tell you any more about how the Amritam in the Kalash was disseminated, I have to talk to you about these two Navagraha planets, right? Because they're related here. Rahu and Ketu, right? Now, according to the Puranas and according to other records, the birth of Rahu and Ketu precedes the Kurma Purana. That means they're already there, right? As part of the Navagrahas. Right? On another session after we finish the Puranas, I will do a one-off session on the Navagrahas. So this Samudra Mandan is regarded as one of the important historical event in Hindu mythology, because that is where the story of Rahu and Ketu also comes, and that is where the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse is also related, right? Science, I'm talking science now, right? So when the Asuras and the Devas churned the ocean, Amrit was produced, right? The Asuras stole it and ran away. Mohini came. Now, one of the Asuras, which had a little bit of intelligence, was called Swarabhanu. Now, this Asura, right, the moment it saw Mohini taking the Kalash and moving away, and the Asuras were following her, she was going in the direction of the Devas. Now, this Swarabhanu Asura had the power to change its form at will. So it changed itself from an Asura to a Deva and went and stood in the queue there so that it can get. But all the Asuras were just following. But this Swarabhanu went there. But Surya and Chandra, sun and the moon, they saw this and they signaled to Vishnu saying that is Swarabhanu disguised as a Deva. So Vishnu sent his Sudarshana Chakra and beheaded Swarbhanu. So no head now, right? Now, the head was lying in one part and the body was lying in another part. The head became known as Rahu, right? And the body became known as Ketu. Now, the head was just decapitated at the point when Mohini was giving a drop of the Amrit to other Devas. So a couple of the drops fell on Swarbhanu's hand and he managed to drink a drop of the nectar of the Amrit. So even though the head was decapitated, they were still alive. So what Vishnu did, right? He took the snake, cut it into half, right? So the head he put to the body of the snake, the body he put to the head of Swarbhanu. That's why you see Rahu and Ketu, they are half human, or the head is human and the body is snake, or the body is human and the head is snake. Two nodes, right? Now that is why you have a popular, a Puranic tale here saying that since then, Rahu and Ketu are always chasing the sun and the moon for revenge, because they said, you are the guys who grasped on us, right? You are the one who told Vishnu. So he used his chakra to decapitate. And apparently, right, it's when they catch up with the sun and the moon, Rahu consumes sun and Ketu consumes Chandra. That is where you have the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse, right? And that is just a mythology that is attached to Rahu and Ketu, that is attached to the Samudra Matan, that is attached to Kurma Purana, right? So Rahu and Ketu are respectively called the north and the south lunar nodes, right? Sometimes when the moon passes these nodes, it is aligned perfectly between the earth and the sun. Therefore, there is an eclipse. And that eclipse is created because of the positioning of Rahu and Ketu. So you have solar eclipse, and you have lunar eclipse. That's the science. And this is what the Jyotisha Shastra uses. People who read, astrologers and the people who read your Kundalini and all of that, the Hindu astrology, Jyotisha Shastra. These cycles of Rahu and Ketu are very, very well known. And sometimes when you go, they tell you, oh, now your planetary position is this way, that way, so it affects you in some. But at the end of the day, if you believe something, it will affect you. If you don't believe it, it shouldn't affect you, right? What you hear cannot affect you until you have believed what you have heard. Then it will start affecting you. So the lesson there is only believe what you think will give you goodness. Others you can just ignore. So Rahu and Ketu are two very strong planets, right? So Mohini then takes it and gives it to all the Devas and then gives the empty pot back to the Asuras. So basically, the Asura quality in man will always try and fight with the Deva quality in man. Asuras and Devas are just characterized as good qualities and bad qualities, right? So that is the lesson for you and me, right? The Rahu and Ketu, from that respect, impact everybody's lives strongly, right? That's why they have a crucial part in Jyotisha Shastra, right? But scientifically and mathematically, they are points which are significant in making calculations in Vedic astrology. So, they draw the 9 houses and then they'll say this house is here. It's all science, right? The general explanation is the sun represents the body and the moon, Manas, represents the mind. Hence, these incision points of Rahu and Ketu strongly affect the energies of the body and the energies of the mind. So when Rahu and Ketu move, it will affect your body and it will affect your mind, right? And there are certain parikaras that you can do to cut that or to reduce that or to curtail that or to curb that, right? So it talks about generally, the astrology talks about, Rahu comes as indulgence and Ketu comes as confusion, right? So sometimes in your life, you indulge in something, suddenly you find, why am I liking this so much? Why am I doing this more than the other things? And Ketu just comes as confusion. Always you're confused, that sort of thing. And it can also, come in the form of some temporary ailment, skin disease, breathing problems, Sun and the moon. Sun is the body, moon is the mind. So it will affect you. Rahu and Ketu will affect you, one or the other. So you see, the Kurma avatar is telling you all this, right? So next week, I will talk to you about Linga and Shiva Purana. Again, Shiva Purana is also very powerful stuff. Okay, any questions? Anyada sharanam nasti tvameva sharanam mamaha tasmat karunya bhavena raksharaksha maheshwaraha. Hari Om Tat Sat.